How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. So,
In the sense when I do see your studio on Zoom, having pieces sort of be at an angle and at different heights or off in the background reminds me of your collages. So it's like this, circular thing of
this and that's really my easel. That's sort of my living room slash studio. I mean, we don't really have a living space other than my studio.
so I'm in a pretty good mood about art.
What would be really interesting is to talk about like what has your process been and moving into what's your new direction of a process.
Oh yeah, I couldn't explain it any other way.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Parallel lines, pen and ink parallel lines, really thin lines, and thicker or thinner as the pen goes. And I'd moved to brush a little bit, but I think I was, still all these years been conceptually thinking of the brush almost as a pen, in that I would move it and like never go back, or maybe to make a technical correction, but basically I would just move it along, and I still viewed it as black lines on color. And I realized that, boy, you have to get so close. There's so many little, like secrets in the lines and the ways they move and the patterns. And I want people to be able to see it more easily. And it just finally came together, right? That I need to go larger, and I need to make, I need to think of it as stripes and painting. And that, and for a long time, I sort of knew that, but didn't go there. And then I think I finally there where I realized, no, I can, in fact, use like a square tipped brush with some thickness, and in fact still do all the patterning stuff and the three-dimensionality and the fracturing of the lines, with the brush, plus a few other things.
So let me ask you something, Robert. What do you think of when you're actually painting a line? Process of actually doing the line, what goes through your head?
As possible, I really do try to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for let me just step back, right? So my pieces tend to be areas of a common pattern, and then areas where the patterns abut and disrupt. And so I'm taking your question as while I'm really
Okay.
making the fluid lines in an area where there is a coherence to it. I'm trying not to think. I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to just copy the previous line, to tap into my sort of lower levels of consciousness, and just sort of, or higher levels maybe, and just let the words go and just meditate and just follow a line. And when I make a mistake, a little jiggle or something,
Mm-hmm.
to not let that catch my consciousness and think, oh, I made a mistake, and oh, I'm not going to fix it. What am I going to? But instead to say, just stay with it. Life's full of mistakes. Just keep going. Just keep going. Just follow, follow, follow. And then of course the mistakes then become, get followed, become bubbles, and they grow and they do all sorts of interesting things.
Really is sort of a being present.
Is it being present?
Yeah.
Being present. And literally sometimes don't be 1 second ago, be this second. This is about this second.
A couple of your pieces that I had recently seen that I wanted to ask some questions of. So could you describe a little bit of how you think of space in your paintings here?
Well, this one is unique that way. Okay, so in that way, this one is not quintessential, because to the extent I have an interpretation of it, it is based in time rather than space. So this really is this is a day in the life, and this is like waking up in the morning, going through your day, and going to bed at night. And because as I was working, that's not how I originally conceived it, but as I worked on it, I began to get this sense of, a day is kind of like this, and that a day has thoughts that are similar, people that recur, maybe somebody you live with who you see in the morning and in the evening, maybe even at lunchtime. Maybe there's something running through your mind the whole day, or something you have to try to remember or forget. Maybe some different contexts that you hit again and again, such as the hallway in the morning and that same hallway in the evening. and that, but that I guess I'm sort of trying to move towards the complexity of a day and sort of the recurrences, but metamorphoses of the same ideas in people. And so it is a day in the life, and I think of this as moving through time with busier periods and quieter periods, depending upon how that day might happen to be going.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So this one I call a road trip. And again, most of my titles come to representational or metaphorical aspect to a piece. It generally is not one that I have at the beginning. It's emergent and it surprises me. So this is a more typical use of space for me, in which there are, again, localized areas that have spatial meaning, and they may partially relate to others, but it doesn't go here as a whole. So for example, I see this as like shooting stars in a distant sky. So that is distant to me. I see this as a near foreground old Chevy, which is why I call it road trip. I don't know if you had seen that, or if that comes across to people. I've shown it to people, and some see it, some don't.
No, I definitely caught the outline of the car, but
this is like the red rock of the Southwest with maybe some hieroglyphics or something like that. So it's a little bit further in the distance. So this is more typical, where I have areas that may make sense as space in different parts of it, but they may intersect in ways that are illogical, or they may just float in ambiguous relationship to each other. It's funny because this is a piece that seems to me more similar to how you use space. I mean, I think we both draw from Kandinsky a little bit, and maybe Miro, maybe some others, but I see in your work that sort of Kandinsky-like use of the entire canvas and the way parts relate to each other that I sometimes aim at. So this piece, is a little bit in that direction, but of the pieces that we picked today, I think this is the one that's closest to me for in structure and use of space to most of your body of work.
Well, that's exactly why I think I picked that, because what I'm always fascinated by is how, when you're looking at people that do more abstract work, and a lot of times I'm sort of on the edge. I do a lot of landscapes as well, because I'm drawing a lot of times kind of from finding that naturally found abstraction in nature. But what interests me about that painting was that to myself, when I'm doing a painting, I usually have a narrative. I identify places. From
the beginning, Kate, or early on?
Yeah, really early on. It doesn't mean that that's going to stay. I'm always kind of reevaluating, re-looking at the work and deciding, like, what is it now? What's it saying to me now? But in my mind, if I can't find some kind of a narrative in the abstraction, it doesn't interest me. I basically am just kind of bored.
Right.
It's like I'm just pushing shapes around, right?
It's like you're not doing Mondrian style. This is about a line and a rectangle. Your work is more inherently referential and evocative of
things. No, I will say that I've got a piece recently that these are definitely more kind of about line and shape. So
interesting.
I flip back and forth all the time, which I think is why in some ways I'm not such a successful selling artist, because my style is I follow my curiosity, I follow my mood. Sometimes I feel like doing geometric shapes, and other times I want to do something that's much more of a personal story. Other times I just kind of see there's things in my head and it's like a dream. I just see what comes out, what sticks, what doesn't, and more, I don't know, naturalistically painting, orchestrate with me what it's going to be.
Right. So that one, now it'd be interesting to see. That one struck me as pure abstraction, non-referential.
Oh no. This is probably more referential than a lot of my prints. Actually, it's a monoprint, which is really I do a monoprint and then I do a lot of drawing on it. But this is absolutely, this is sort of what I would call my gestural period. Last year I was doing the Fountain of Youth. I was also doing my show that was called Dousing for Water. So the whole themes have been water. So to me, this is really like, one, I hesitate to tell people because I don't want them to then only associate what I'm saying I see with what they see
Mhm.
or feel. I label all of these waterfall series, so that sort of gives you
Okay.
the title. So I mean, I see this as basically a big waterfall, and then the turbulence of the water. You know, there's rocks, there's other springs coming off. A lot of times when I work with abstraction, really what I kind of call naturally found abstraction, I also work a lot with sort of been my premise of how I do abstract. Like most of abstraction is somehow deconstructing. I do a lot of deconstructing and reconstructing. But in so doing, what I'm really trying to capture is the fact that when you walk and you look, you're constantly turning your head from here to here to here to here. So you're making this line through space that um, involves all kinds of different angles and pictures and images. And then, you know, your brain kind of puts that together as a scene. And I'm not really that interested in the final like static scene. I'm interested in the activity, the gesture, the emotions, the passion that goes into how we walk around life, right? The total experience. So in that way, I think that that's where both of ours works a lot of times sort of intersect, because I think we do look at that in certain ways. Maybe not all our paintings, but you know, there's certainly paintings that I think do that overlap.
Right. Well, the peace of mind that we talked about with the road trip one, right? I mean, so that very much is. Uh, I mean, it's not exactly the way you described, you know, what one is seeing in a moment, right? But it is the different aspects of a 10-day period. And perhaps it's even blends two road trips I took in my youth. I mean, it's definitely, you know, I went cross country, you know, a number of times between ages of like 17 and 30. And you know, and so, but this is, it's primarily focused on a road trip I took with my brother, but it probably has elements of others, and it's blurry by just the mists of the decades that go by, but it is very much that, you know, capturing an aspect of this, an aspect of that, a piece of memory, you know, that sort of thing, as compared to a day in the life, which is that sort of pure Mondrian type
Right.
abstraction, in the sense of not and you know, one could argue about Mondrian, but you know, not referencing objects. I'm curious, of the pieces of yours that we were talking about, this was the only one that I thought might be pure abstraction, non-referential. Are any of them? Because the others all look to me quite referential.
Um, yeah, I mean, like this one is actually one of my favorites. And this is definitely referential. Although, to me, I would say that most people would probably see this as being pure abstraction.
Right. I mean, I see it now. Of course, you know, I don't know if the images and the, you know, and the perspectives that come to me are what are in your head, right? I mean, you know, I know with my work, you know, what people see is often very different than what I see, and I take that for us, for us, for our work, as that we are aiming at sort of basic, almost primeval, you know, sort of geometric concepts, structures, shapes, colors, and patterns that are so basic that they can evoke different things in different people, right?
Right. And
But
this is actually, this started out as being what I do a lot, which is the collage elements from my drawings. I kind of, again, I do a drawing, I kind of deconstruct it, and then I kind of put it back together again, sometimes borrowing other things. And it was really quite a story of sort of a voyage. But then once I'm done, I really look at something like I would
when you're done with the
with I'm
collaging,
done sort of like putting it together for the collage, right? Then I start to really look at it as a painting. Like, what's the composition? What's the color? How are the lines working together? Um, and so basically what I start with is rarely looks anything like the end.
let's go back to the beginning.
Cover it up.
Talk to me more. Talk to me more about your process in the collaging, you know, because you were talking about often having an initial sense of things, events, space, or something. I mean, is that true when you're collaging, or if not, how do you, what is it you think you're, what is it you're trying to do as you're in that process?
Okay, so like in this one, I had actually seen
Which I think, which may be, you know, it's certainly one of my favorites of yours. I love this piece.
this probably comes closest to actually thinking of a scene in my head and then making it. Although this didn't look at anything like this when I started. I actually didn't know I was going to basically make this. As far as you can kind of see, there's little hidden parts where I like trees. I do a lot of trees, which are usually sort of these, you know, more straight areas. But you see what I do is I put those on as reference points as far as sort of what I want to develop with space. But then I also try to cover that. Like if I make a mark, I want to making a mark of veil. It's veiling and unveiling all the time. What's there but not there. So I usually draw over a lot of the collage elements so that unlike a lot of people who do collage where they put something and that something stays there, I'm really then veiling it, and it becomes sort of like this secret message that's underneath the painting. That's my story. And I'm veiling it with something on top that adds.
Well, it's what's interesting here, at least, you know, I mean, let's just talk about your trees in this piece. I do love, you know, this is one of my favorite of your piece, just that you are, you know, making more complicated, you know, you're not drawing like simple straight line and, you know, you're making it more complicated. But the way what you're doing here is I see these what look like certainly reminiscent of treetops here, and these, you know, sort of like, you know, bark down here, and it's just like, it's like different parts, different distances, all coming together. And so it speaks of tree and the sort of whole experience you might get like when you go through like a birch type forest, or, you know, you just have trunk and dispersed and no lower branches, because that's how that forest is. And it evokes that, it evokes the trees in the distance. And by putting them together and having them intersect, it just captures this, like, you know, essence of treeness. So I love that little section.
No, I really appreciate hearing you say that, because a lot of, you know, I've used the term, you know, essence for a long time in my life. And, you know, part times I go, well, how descriptive is essence, you know, but it really is what it is. It's the essence of being in a place, a space, a time, a memory, a smell. I've started really coming to think about describing my work, or at least, you know, what I'm thinking of when I'm doing my work, and when I know that it's done, basically, is when it captures something in somebody where you feel like your primitive soul knows it. You can't name it. It is not quite a deja vu, but it's sort of like your visceral, primitive, you know, limbic mind gets it.
About like this limbic basic sense of when something is done, but yet the way you do that, the way you're doing it is with specific marks. So how do those relate?
Well, that's a good question. So usually in the beginning, I'm much more like have that art school head, which is really horrific. It's like, oh, I should do this, I should do that. My colors should be, you know, tonal range. I should think of my composition, blah, blah, you know, I mean, so I kind of structure a lot along those lines. And finally, when the piece takes off is when I just like throw away all the knowledge I have of how to make art, what makes a good painting, and I simply respond. I get into my head where I'm not thinking about it at all. I'm just doing a response. I don't think about whether I'm using a warm color or a cool color or whatever. I just look at my palette. You know, this is why I love doing pastels, because, you know, I've got shells of pastels, and you look at it's a total trust as far as I go. I need that one. Okay. Or sometimes I go in my head, like, I need a muddy orange. Okay, I want that one. And it needs to have more distinction. It's like, you know, here it's like I was thinking this is actually sort of a clearing, and this is sort of like a fire element, and you know, this is like the water from the clouds coming down and pooling up and feeding the springs here. What I love about the collage is that it kind of gives me something to fight against on the line. So what's interesting to me is when I hear you say you make a mistake, but you go with your mistake, and I go, it's not a mistake. That's what makes the line alive. Okay, it gives it character. So that's what I love about drawing over bumpy things. Okay, my line is just, you know, it kind of has that crazy funkiness to it where it's alive and there's energy in it. And the more I have to kind of like fight to make that line, I think the better it gets.
First, I just have to respond to something you said there, which is, so there's mistakes and mistakes, right? So there are things that are mistakes. But you're right. I don't, you know, I mean, when I used the word mistake there, and then I said, I've got to let go of that as I'm working. So that's just like, you know, this is like, you know, the different elements of my brain, right? Which is, I completely agree with you. So there's a part of me that says, oh, you made a mistake. It didn't follow that exactly. And then there's another part of me that's saying, well, you know, let's not think about it that way. Let's just move on, right? Let's just move. This is flow, it's process, right? So there's that. But there's also, so some of my work is more algorithmic, right? I mean, so some of it is I'm just going to make lines and just follow them. But then there's stuff where there's a pattern there. Like maybe it's, you know, a set of shells or lines with something, you know, bubbling out of them. And how is it bubbling out? Maybe it's bubbling out that the bubbling out section uses 2 thick lines and 1 thin one, 2 thick and 1 thin. And so sometimes I make actual algorithmic mistakes, which is like, oh, shit, I only did 1 thick line. And so then my challenge is then I have to say, well, so now I need a higher level algorithm. So the algorithm was 2 sets of 2 thick and 1 thin, and now 1 set of 1 thick and 1 thin. And so now I have this meta algorithm that I use. Anyway, so that's mistakes. So algorithmic art is a different subject. I did want
to go back to another one of yours. So this one is one that I actually find it rather humorous.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
And I'm not sure why, but I think I really love seeing the different colors of lines and the variation. Of course, I work in pathology, so I work with cells a lot. So this definitely looks sort of like, you know, a cellular membrane. But aside from that, it's organic, even though you're following very specific structures of how you make it.
So I guess if I don't know how to talk about this without referring to an earlier body of work. Hunkering down in March, you know, everything I'd been working on was big and colorful, 2 foot by 3 foot, and perhaps not quite at your level of intensity of color, but for me pushing my limits. Right? And then all of a sudden, you know, the world just kind of collapses and we're all terrified. I mean, not only down to 5 by 7, and I just went back to what I did at the very beginning. Okay, I'm just going back to it, which is fill the entire piece of paper with black lines, right? And that's just, and even then I couldn't do more than like half an hour at a time, because it was just, you know, somebody would call and say, oh my God, what's life like there? Right. So, but I could do a bit at a time. And so I did these 4 pieces over the space of like 4 to 6 weeks. That was my total artistic output. It was these 4 just lines going out. That period after this, you know, when we were no longer so frightened, and still plenty to worry about, but okay, it's not the end of civilization. So this was the response to that. So I used this pattern, you know, is that it's still that same pattern that I had been using in the pure hunkering down black and white pieces of these sort of squares. But they just start to get more rambunctious here and fold in on itself, and then at the top they begin to escape. And I put in some color here, right? I mean, it's
Right.
not. This is not riotous reds and yellows and iridescent blues, but nor is it completely colorless. So it was like, this is how I responded to that period. Like probably well, it says May 24th. I put a date on it. That period in late May where we're beginning to get out and maybe do some takeout food and go for a stroll in the park.
You do, you subtly bring in the color, and it starts to just sort of, open up and escape. So.
Okay, this is so much fun. This is as a matter of fact, why haven't we been doing this all along? This is
I know.
terrific.
I mean, it's so funny because I think, well, to be honest, I think we should embrace Zoom more than we have, because even though it'd be great to be with each other, it's actually harder to share work when you're kind of one-on-one, unless you're in somebody's studio, right? It's kind of easier actually on the computer to say, oh yeah, let me pull that up. So I hope that we should continue talking more, and I'll try to edit this down to some reasonable size.
Yeah. No, but just to have another abstract. I mean, you play in some of the same sandboxes that I do in ways that are, because some people are. I mean, there just aren't that many people who are sort of walking this space in pure abstraction and referential abstraction and working in largely but not entirely, not completely two-dimensional frameworks. And so it's just fascinating for me to hear you speak. Both you'll say things, and some of them, wow, that's really different, and some that's like, oh yes, me too. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
I love to talk about this. And